It starts with a woman standing in a park, phone in hand, her voice rising in manufactured distress. She is calling the police, claiming she feels threatened. The camera zooms out, and we see a black man standing calmly, recording her reaction. This is not a rare scene. It is one of the countless viral moments that define what the world has come to know as Karen culture. Karen culture is not just a meme or an internet joke. It is a reflection of how deep systemic racism runs in everyday interactions. The term itself has evolved over time, now used to describe individuals, often white women, who weaponize their privilege to control or endanger black people. These actions range from making baseless emergency calls to engaging in public outbursts when their entitlement is challenged. But where did this behavior originate? It is not new, and it did not begin with smartphones capturing these moments. History is full of Karens, women who have used their racial privilege to manipulate systems of oppression. From the days of segregation, when false accusations led to violent repercussions, to modern times, where a single call to the police can turn deadly, Karen culture has always existed. It is only now that technology has made it impossible to ignore. Take, for instance, the infamous case of Amy Cooper, a white woman in New York who called the police on a black birdwatcher in Central Park. Her voice shook as she falsely claimed he was threatening her life. In reality, he had only asked her to leash her dog, as required by park rules. When the video surfaced, it sparked outrage. People could see, in real time, how her words carried the power to put an innocent man in danger. It was a modern-day example of an age-old tactic, using whiteness as a weapon. This is not about isolated incidents. It is about patterns. Karens do not just appear in viral videos. They exist in schools, workplaces, and neighborhoods. They call security on black students who do not belong on their own college campuses. They question black families at community pools, assuming they're trespassers. They demand to see managers, asserting dominance when the smallest inconvenience disrupts their sense of control. It is important to recognize that Karen culture does not exist in a vacuum. It thrives because of a justice system that disproportionately punishes black people while allowing white individuals to act out without consequence. If the roles in these viral incidents were reversed, if black people weaponize their emotions in the same way, the outcomes would be far more severe. Police encounters do not in the same way for black and white individuals. The privilege to escalate a situation and walk away unharmed is not one that black people share. Understanding Karen culture requires looking beyond individual moments and into the structures that allow it to persist. Historically, white women's false accusations have had devastating consequences for black men and women. One of the most haunting examples is the case of Emmett Till, a 14-year-old boy lynched in 1955 after a white woman falsely claimed he had harassed her. Decades later, she admitted that her story was not true. But the damage had already been done, and the story had already become another chapter in America's long history of racial violence. This is why Karen culture matters. It is not simply about entitlement or rude behavior. It is about how racial bias can have life-threatening consequences. It is about how white privilege allows certain individuals to play the victim while painting black people as aggressors. And it is about how these incidents, though they may seem trivial on the surface, reinforce deeper systems of oppression. There's a reason why these videos go viral. They are shocking, but not because they are rare. They are shocking because they expose what black people have always known. These encounters are everyday realities. The only difference now is that they are being recorded. But recording is not enough. What happens after the camera stops? Does the world move on until the next Karen moment? Or does society finally start to address the privilege and power that fuel these encounters? The weight of these encounters does not disappear when the viral moment fades. For black individuals who experience them, the trauma lingers. It is more than just an uncomfortable exchange. It is a reminder of the constant scrutiny, the ever-present danger of being perceived as a threat for simply existing. Consider the countless cases where Karen culture has escalated into violent or even fatal encounters. The story often follows a similar pattern. A white woman makes a baseless accusation, law enforcement responds with force, and the consequences fall disproportionately on the black person involved. The justice system does not protect black individuals in the same way it shields those who abuse their privilege. This privilege is not just about who gets to call the police. It is about whose word is automatically believed. When a white woman claims she feels unsafe, it often carries more weight than a black person insisting on their innocence. This imbalance of power has been reinforced for centuries, deeply embedded in the fabric of American society. It is no coincidence that Karen culture overwhelmingly involves white women. Throughout history, white femininity has been weaponized as a tool for racial control. The image of the fragile, innocent white woman in distress has justified unspeakable violence against black people. It is a pattern seen in history books, in courtrooms, and now, in viral videos shared across social media. Even in cases where no physical harm occurs, the psychological damage is undeniable. Black individuals who are unfairly targeted in these incidents often carry the burden long after the public has moved on. They are left to process the humiliation, the fear, and the knowledge that their lives could have been irrevocably changed in an instant. This is why these videos, though painful to watch, serve an important purpose. They expose what has long been denied. For years, black people have spoken about the microaggressions, the false accusations, and the manufactured fear that places their lives at risk. Yet, without video evidence, their experiences were often dismissed. Now, with cameras in nearly every pocket, the truth is impossible to ignore. But what happens after the exposure? Viral outrage is fleeting. Today's Karen moment will be replaced by tomorrow's scandal, and the cycle continues. Public shaming alone does not dismantle the systems that allow these behaviors to persist. Real change requires more than just awareness. It demands accountability. Some companies and institutions have started taking action, firing employees caught engaging in racist behavior. While this may seem like progress, it does not address the larger issue. Individual consequences do not dismantle systemic racism. These moments are not just about one bad actor. They are symptoms of a much deeper disease. To understand why Karen culture continues to thrive, one must examine the structures that enable it. Law enforcement's immediate trust in white women's words is not an accident. It is the result of decades of racial conditioning. The legal system's tendency to side with white individuals is not an anomaly. It is a reflection of a justice system designed to protect whiteness at all costs. So what can be done? The first step is acknowledging that these incidents are not just isolated acts of entitlement. They are reflections of a society that has long upheld racial hierarchies. Confronting Karen culture means challenging the privilege that fuels it. It means questioning why white distress is prioritized over black safety. It means holding people accountable, not just in viral moments, but in everyday life. This accountability must extend beyond individual Karens to the systems that allow them to operate without consequence. It requires changes in policing, education, and public policy. It requires white allies to recognize their role in dismantling privilege, rather than simply condemning the most extreme examples of it. Karen culture exists because it has been allowed to exist. The question is, how much longer will society tolerate it? Understanding Karen culture means recognizing that it is not just about the individuals caught on camera. It is about the world that created them. It is about the social conditioning that teaches white women that their discomfort matters more than a black person's safety. It is about a system that rewards them for playing the victim while punishing black individuals for defending themselves. But where does this entitlement come from? To answer that, one must look at history. For centuries, white women have been placed on a pedestal as symbols of purity and virtue. This ideal was not just about gender. It was deeply tied to race. During slavery, white women were portrayed as delicate beings in need of protection, while black men were painted as dangerous predators. This false narrative led to laws and practices that criminalized black existence. Even after slavery ended, these ideas persisted. The Jim Crow era was built on the foundation of white supremacy, where the mere suggestion of a black man disrespecting a white woman could lead to lynching. White women were often at the center of these tragedies, not as victims, but as instigators. Their word alone could seal the fate of an innocent person. Fast forward to today, and the echoes of this history remain. The woman calling the police on a black man in a park may not see herself as a racist. She may believe she is simply standing her ground, but in reality, she is tapping into the same racial power dynamics that have existed for generations. She knows, consciously or not, that her fear will be prioritized over his innocence. This is why Karen culture is so dangerous. It is not just about loud public outbursts or exaggerated distress. It is about the ability to manipulate the system with a simple accusation. It is about knowing that the police will show up and believe you, no matter how ridiculous the claim. It is about understanding that your tears carry more weight than someone else's truth. And it is not just white women who perpetuate this culture. White men, too, engage in similar behaviors, though they are often labeled differently. While Karens rely on emotional manipulation, their male counterparts, often called Ken or Kevin, use aggression and dominance. They police black bodies in public spaces, question why black people are in their neighborhoods, and escalate situations that never should have been an issue in the first place. Both Karens and Kens operate from the same foundation, a belief that they are entitled to control their surroundings, even at the expense of others. It is the mindset that justifies calling the police on a black family having a picnic. It is the attitude that fuels complaints about black children selling lemonade in their own driveways. It is the arrogance that makes someone believe they have the authority to determine who belongs where. What makes this behavior especially dangerous is that it is not always recognized as racism. Unlike overt hate crimes or explicit slurs, Karen moments are often disguised as concern, discomfort, or misunderstanding. This allows those engaging in them to deny their own biases. I was just following the rules. I did not mean any harm. I was only trying to help. These justifications allow racism to persist in ways that are harder to confront. But ignoring these incidents does not make them harmless. Every false accusation, every unnecessary emergency call, every attempt to police black existence contributes to a larger culture of racial control. These moments reinforce the idea that black people must constantly prove their innocence, that they must navigate the world with caution, and that their lives can be upended in an instant over someone else's feelings. This is why speaking out matters. Calling out Karen culture is not about shaming individuals. It is about dismantling the structures that empower them. It is about shifting the narrative so that black people's voices are believed just as readily as their white counterparts. It is about ensuring that white distress is no longer seen as more important than black dignity. The goal is not just to expose Karens, but to create a world where they no longer have power over black lives. That requires real change, changes in policing, in laws, in societal attitudes. It requires a commitment to challenging racism not just when it goes viral, but in everyday interactions. Because at the end of the day, Karen culture is not just a joke. It is not just an internet trend. It is a symptom of a much deeper problem. And until that problem is addressed, the cycle will continue. The fight against Karen culture is not just about exposing individuals. It is about confronting the deep-seated racism that allows these behaviors to flourish. The real challenge is not capturing these moments on video, but preventing them from happening in the first place. That requires more than just outrage. It requires action. One of the most important steps is education. Many people who engage in Karen-like behavior do not see themselves as racist. They have been conditioned to believe that their actions are justified, that their concerns are valid, and that their discomfort matters more than a black person's dignity. This is why conversations about privilege and bias are so crucial. White individuals must acknowledge the role they play in upholding these power structures, even if they do not actively engage in Karen-like behavior themselves. Silence is complicity. It is not enough to disapprove of racism privately. True allyship means speaking up when injustice occurs, challenging friends and family members who display racial bias, and recognizing when one's own actions contribute to the problem. Another critical step is changing how these situations are handled at an institutional level. Too often, the police are used as weapons in these encounters. White individuals know that a simple phone call can bring law enforcement to their aid, even when no real threat exists. This misuse of police resources not only wastes time, but also puts black lives in danger. To combat this, Stronger laws must be put in place to hold people accountable for false emergency calls based on racial bias. Some cities have begun introducing penalties for racially motivated 911 calls, but these measures are not widespread. Until there are real consequences for using the police as a tool of oppression, Karen culture will continue to thrive. Beyond legal action, businesses and organizations must take responsibility as well. Many viral Karen incidents take place in stores, restaurants, and workplaces. Companies must implement anti-racism training and have clear policies in place to address discrimination. Employees must be trained to recognize racial bias and respond appropriately when these incidents occur. But systemic change is slow, and in the meantime, the burden continues to fall on Black individuals to protect themselves in these encounters. The sad reality is that Black people must always be aware of how they are perceived, how their actions might be misinterpreted, and how quickly a situation can escalate. This is why community support is essential. When Karen moments go viral, there is often an immediate outpouring of anger online. People demand accountability, they call for consequences, and sometimes the individuals involved face repercussions. But what happens when the attention fades? The Black individuals affected by these incidents still have to navigate the trauma left behind. True support goes beyond social media outrage. It means standing with victims long after the headlines disappear. It means providing resources, offering legal assistance, and creating spaces where Black voices are heard and believed. It means ensuring that those affected by racial bias do not have to carry the burden alone. Karen culture will not disappear overnight. It is a reflection of a society built on racial inequality, and dismantling it requires constant effort. But progress is possible. With education, accountability, and collective action, the power dynamics that fuel these encounters can be challenged. The question is, what will it take for people to finally say enough is enough? How many more viral moments must happen before real change occurs? How many more innocent Black individuals must be humiliated, threatened, or harmed before society truly acknowledges the weight of these encounters? The responsibility does not just lie with those who engage in Karen-like behavior. It lies with everyone who allows it to continue. It is not enough to watch these videos in shock. It is not enough to shake our heads and move on. Change requires more. It requires a commitment to justice, to truth, and to dismantling the privilege that allows racism to hide in plain sight. History will remember how society responds to this moment. The choice is clear. Continue allowing Karen culture to thrive, or take the necessary steps to end it once and for all. Ending Karen culture is not just about identifying the problem. It is about actively working toward a solution. The power of social media has brought these incidents into the public eye, but true change requires more than just awareness. It demands action, accountability, and a collective effort to challenge the structures that uphold white privilege and systemic racism. One of the most powerful tools in this fight is legislation. Some states have introduced laws that penalize individuals who make false police reports based on racial bias. These laws are a step in the right direction, but they must be enforced consistently and expanded nationwide. Calling the police on Black people for simply existing in public spaces is a dangerous abuse of emergency services, and it should be treated as such. But legal changes alone are not enough. Society must also address the underlying biases that lead to these incidents. This starts with education. Schools must teach students about systemic racism, privilege, and the history of racial oppression in the United States. These conversations should not be limited to history books. They must be an ongoing part of how society understands race and identity. Parents play a crucial role as well. Many of the behaviors seen in Karen culture are learned at a young age. White children are often raised with an unspoken understanding that their experiences and emotions are prioritized over those of Black children. They grow up in environments where Blackness is associated with danger, criminality, or suspicion. These lessons may not be explicitly taught, but they are absorbed through media, family interactions, and societal norms. Breaking this cycle requires intentional conversations about race. White parents must teach their children to recognize and challenge privilege rather than exploit it. They must raise the next generation to see Black individuals as equals, not threats. This is not about guilt. It is about responsibility. Businesses also have a role to play. Many viral Karen incidents occur in public spaces where employees must decide how to handle conflicts. Companies must train their staff to recognize racial bias and respond to situations fairly. Employees should be empowered to de-escalate conflicts rather than immediately siding with a white customer. Furthermore, when companies fail to act, they must be held accountable. The power of consumer activism has already forced some businesses to take a stand against racism. Boycotts and public pressure have led to policy changes, but these efforts must be sustained. Companies that tolerate racism should face real financial consequences. On an individual level, white allies must do more than simply condemn Karen behavior when it goes viral. They must challenge racism in their daily lives, even when it is uncomfortable. This means calling out biased behavior among friends and family, supporting Black voices without centering themselves in the conversation, and recognizing when they may be contributing to the problem. Being an ally is not about appearing woke online. It is about taking real steps to dismantle privilege. It means stepping back and listening when Black individuals share their experiences. It means understanding that racism is not just about overt acts of hate, but also about the subtle ways in which privilege operates. For Black individuals, navigating a world where Karen culture exists is exhausting. The constant need to defend oneself, to stay calm in the face of blatant racism, to document interactions for proof, these are burdens that should not have to be carried. Yet, time and time again, Black people are forced to prove their humanity, while those who falsely accuse them face little to no consequences. This is why collective action is necessary. Change does not happen in isolation. It requires people from all backgrounds to come together and demand better. It requires a commitment to challenging racism not just in its most extreme forms, but in everyday interactions. Karen culture is a symptom of a larger disease. It thrives in a world where whiteness is prioritized, where Black voices are questioned, and where the mere presence of a Black person in a white space is seen as a problem. Dismantling it means dismantling the systems that allow it to exist. The question remains, how long will society allow this to continue? How many more viral videos, public apologies, and temporary moments of outrage will it take before real, lasting change occurs? Because the truth is, the end of Karen culture is not just about stopping these viral moments. It is about ensuring that Black people no longer have to fear for their safety, their dignity, or their lives every time they step into public spaces. The fight against Karen culture is ultimately a fight against the deep-rooted structures of white supremacy that have existed for centuries. It is about recognizing that racism is not just about the explicit hatred of Black people, but also about the everyday ways in which privilege and power are used to oppress. The viral moments that expose Karen behavior are just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath them lies a much larger system that has always prioritized whiteness at the expense of Black lives. It is no coincidence that Karen culture thrives in a society where Black people are constantly forced to prove their innocence. Where a simple trip to the store, a walk in the park, or a casual gathering can be interrupted by someone who believes they have the right to police Black existence. These incidents do not happen in a vacuum. They are the direct result of a culture that has, for generations, treated white comfort as more important than Black dignity. To dismantle this culture, society must be willing to do more than just react when a Karen incident goes viral. It must actively work to change the conditions that allow these incidents to happen in the first place. That means rethinking the way law enforcement operates, addressing the biases that shape public spaces, and ensuring that accountability is the norm, not the exception. One of the biggest obstacles to change is the refusal of many to acknowledge the problem. There are those who dismiss Karen culture as an internet joke, as something exaggerated or blown out of proportion. But to those who have been on the receiving end of these encounters, it is anything but funny. These moments are humiliating, exhausting, and often dangerous. They reinforce the idea that Black people must always be on guard, that their every action is subject to scrutiny in ways that white people will never experience. This is why conversations about race and privilege are so necessary. It is not enough to simply disapprove of racism. One must actively work against it. And that work begins with understanding. White individuals must take it upon themselves to educate themselves on these issues rather than expecting Black people to do the emotional labor for them. They must be willing to listen, to unlearn harmful narratives, and to accept that being anti-racist is a lifelong commitment. For Black individuals, the fight against Karen culture is about survival. It is about reclaiming the right to exist without fear, without suspicion, without the constant burden of proving one's worth. It is about challenging the systems that have, for too long, allowed false accusations and racial profiling to go unpunished. But most importantly, it is about hope. Hope that future generations will not have to endure the same struggles. Hope that one day, Black people will be able to live freely, without the constant threat of being targeted simply for existing. The end of Karen culture is possible, but only if society is willing to confront the truth. Only if people are willing to take real action rather than settling for temporary outrage. Because racism does not disappear when the cameras stop rolling. It continues in boardrooms, in classrooms, in neighborhoods, in policies that uphold inequality. And so, the question remains, what will it take for real change to happen? How many more Black lives must be disrupted, threatened, or lost before the world finally says enough is enough? The answer lies in the actions of every person watching, listening, and learning. Change is not just about demanding accountability from Karens. It is about ensuring that racism, in all its forms, is no longer tolerated. It is about recognizing that Black lives are not just a trending topic, but a reality that deserves respect, dignity, and justice. The time for change is now. The question is, who will rise to the challenge?